Where all is doubt, may we sow faith. Where all is gloom, may we sow hope. Where all is night, may we sow light. Where all is tears, may we sow joy. Amen. Let me first say, as a practitioner of preaching now for 16 years, the scenario we find ourselves in is a curious one. I hadn't really realized until we got to this experience of an empty set of pews out here in the nave, how much preaching is, even for me, a social engagement, right? I can put in cues in a manuscript, har, 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 and laugh, 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 and those sorts of things, or pregnant pause. I can put that in a manuscript, but I've come to realize how much I miss having actual people in the pews who are doing the work with me of creating meaning together, because we pick up these cues from being together, like when it's time to wrap it up, or you'll get little nods from over here, or you'll get these, or folks will check watches. So there's a process of creating a container for the word to show up in. There's a process by which we nod in agreement with one another, or we'll disapprovingly say, no, don't go down that rabbit hole, let's stay back on the trail here. And I'm missing that. And so as a person preaching in this very moment, I just want to say, I miss the people stuff. I miss getting to see how tender everyone is with each other in the pews. I miss having young ones running up and down the aisles. And I miss greeting folks at the front door who are coming in at the last minute to sneak in before the procession. And as a preacher, I miss this togetherness that we share as we're cracking the word open. It's those little things that hopefully we will not take for granted when we are back together again. As my beloved Grandpa Ray used to ask the family when the going got tough, and he passed that tradition on to the rest of us, when the going got tough, he would ask us with a big bright smile, are we having any fun yet? And I've been thinking about that here in the last week or so, preparing for this homily. Are we having any fun yet? Not that fun is the be-all and end-all, but in terms of those things that give us resilience and give us the capacity to keep showing up time and time again, it matters in life that we not lose our humanity. And of course, fun is part of that. Preached a few weeks ago on the importance of playfulness as one of those things that helps us build resilience in the midst of challenge and disorder. Resilience comes from playfulness and joy and happiness and fun in a way that helps us continue to show up in that public arena where we're having hard conversations about not just defaulting to an easy piece, even those easy peace narratives that we sing about, as we did just now, but the peace that presumes all the hard work ahead of the peace, right? A just peace that we actually mean when we sing about God's peace, and the shalom of the kingdom of God presumes all sorts of justice work before we show up to the peaceable kingdom. And that takes resilience and strength and courage, and it takes fun and joy and playfulness. It's been one of those weeks where in the preparation for this, when I get anxious and I'm not 100% sure what I want to say, I'll spend a lot of time with what other people are saying about the text. It's an anxiety reliever, right? Is I think, I'm just going to find somebody who said it right, and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to plug it in. And so I'll stack books, and I'll spend lots of times on social media to figure out who's got it right this week. And so this has been one of those weeks where this is sort of a well-trod set of propers, right? I mean, people know these stories well. They've been preached far better than I'm going to preach here this morning. And so there's an intimidation factor to it that is the question about, well, what do I bring to the table as a value add on picking these scriptures apart this morning and hopefully sharing an edifying good word to the church this morning. And in my social media time this week, which is far too much. And the beauty of modern technology is your iPhone at the end of each week now tells you how you compare to last week. right? We've got that thing, it pops up in a big blue thing and it says, good for you, you're up, like 20% from last week. And I hate to tell you how many hours I was up this week looking at what other folks have said and what folks are saying, and mostly behind all that, what are people experiencing in this moment in which I know if my grandfather were here, he would be asking us, are we having any fun yet? One particular post grabbed me in the midst of all of them, right? In the midst of all of them where there's clear tension, we are clearly losing patience with one another. We are clearly grieving and suffering and isolating and missing all those little touches where we bump into one another and kind of hit the reset button on relationships. It's the isolation that has us sort of bending away from each other, and it's getting really easy to lob critique and insult and disparagement. And it makes it tougher for us to assume the best of anybody when we're isolated this way and starting to bend away from one another. I'm aware of that, and certainly it's true for me as well. But this particular post that showed up that really grabbed my attention for me this week really got to the heart of the matter. And what the post was about was really asking the question, if all of this disruption and pain and grief and suffering in the world around us is true, why isn't the church able to show up as the bearer, right, the body that is bearing the fact of having gotten it right? If the world gets it so wrong, why doesn't the church show up perfect, clear on the truth, that we have not only done the justice work, but that we're at peace with one another, right? That we've got a good word to share with the world, that we don't have any members who ever blow it, right? Why isn't the church that thing that shows up, kind of drops from the sky in total perfection? And I remember asking that question some 25, 26 years ago as a young adult. And by the grace of God, I'm surrounded with people on a regular basis who still ask that question, right? Who force me on a regular basis to ask that question. Not taking my profession for granted, not assuming, well, I work for the church, so I'm going to kind of deny the shadow side of our lives together, but forcing me to answer the question, sometimes to my chagrin, why can't the church get this right? Right? Why are we a mess? It doesn't seem like we're any better than the world around us, right? So what's going on here? And this particular post just grabbed my attention, mostly because it was posted by somebody who I think is asking all the right questions all the time. But the self-perception of that individual is that they have to ask those questions from outside the church, right? That they have to be outside the church looking in to make that critique, rather than the assumption that we've already asked the question. We ask the question of ourselves on a regular basis. In fact, it's in our Constitution that we are a mess, right? It's in our meta-narrative that we're a mess. It's in there. We know it about ourselves. And yet, as an imperfect body of people who come together, we've got this incredible vocation to try to bear something helpful into the world, right? We know that. And it just always breaks my heart that the church is putting off some sort of signal to the world around us, and particularly to folks who are asking hard questions about the world we live in, that they can only ask those questions outside of us, right? That they can only disparage from outside of us, not that they can be among us as a prophetic voice that says, absolutely. On the one hand, we've got high aspirations. We're aware in Genesis 1 of the beautiful vision of the peaceable kingdom that God has created and in a way has promised to us. And even with those aspirations, even with that holy promise, we have the real present time now, right? And we've got a word for that, right? I suspect you know this word, right? Eschatology. We are in the now and the not yet. There's an inherent tension built into that, and we know it. And at our best, we create room among us to cultivate those hard questions. How come we're more of the now than the not yet? It's a legitimate question. We should ask it regularly. Why is it so hard for us to get it right? Why is it so hard for us to get along? Why is it so hard for us to make a difference in the world around us? Why is it that we have folks among us who still continue to kind of struggle and by all apparent means aren't picking up what God is laying down? Why is it that sin persists? Why is it that we are the way we are? That's the fundamental question. Knowing what God created us to be, why is it that we are the way we are? Those are the fundamental questions. And so this Sunday, we enter into that realm, yet another tool in addition to happiness and playfulness and joy that keep us resilient and in the arena doing the hard work. What we get this week is this beautiful, imaginative story about the nature of us, right? This is not new that we've got conflict among the faithful. It is not new that there's conflict in the world. And so 1,000 years ago, right, 3,000 years ago, folks sat down and they wrote stories because their own experience was tension and conflict, not only within those gathered, but around those gathered. How do we understand conflict? How do we understand that we're imperfect in and among ourselves? How do we understand that? And so the writers of Genesis, 25 chapters after the beautiful image of God's promise to the world of the perfect, peaceable kingdom where everyone's feasting on milk and honey, 25 chapters later, we have a story that reminds us again, not just that we get it wrong, but that conflict, tension, discord is baked into the human family, right? We had folks 3,000 years ago who said, well, rather than just assuming that we're all getting it wrong and that we're sort of so far east of Eden that there's no hope or promise for us, what if we just bake it into the narrative of us? What if we understand that in the story of Isaac and Rebekah and their sons Esau and Jacob, that it's just baked into our reality that though we have these high aspirations, the present moment now, in the real time here, is baked through with discord. Tension is real. It is among us. It doesn't mean we're getting it wrong or right. It simply is what it is. And so one of the tools we get from Genesis, 25 chapters after the original story of perfection, is the real story, right? The real stuff. Guess what? Even though we're aiming at perfection, imperfection is the rule of the day. It is what you're living in. It doesn't mean you're getting it right or wrong. It just is what it is. It is the reality of the now that is leaning out towards the not yet. Don't beat yourselves up. Don't give up. Don't leave the arena of doing God's hard work because you wonder why we can't get it right. Stick with it. Lean in. Love these folks that you have discord with because they're of the same family. All children of Abraham and Sarah, right? It matters that under this prayer that Jesus teaches us, our Father, that we really understand that we're kin, right? We may be at odds. There may be conflict. There may be incredible injustice. We may want to bend away and never see each other once again ever. We may even abide by the direction of the lizard brain and decide the right thing to do here is to wipe our enemy off the face of the earth. We may get there, but this narrative says you cannot go there if you are the beloved of God because we are all kin. The tension is baked into us. It's part of the reality. Jesus shows up then today to answer the question, why so hard? Why so tough? Why does it seem that there's so much diversity among us in terms of kind of who's leaning into what God's up to and who's leaning out? And Jesus has this great story in the midst of those same set of questions that Genesis was addressing. In those same tensions, Jesus tells this parable. A sower was sowing, scattering seed recklessly across an open field of mixed terrain. Some of the seed falls on a path, well-trodden, familiar to us, perhaps to the point of taking it for granted what is below our feet. We don't stop to smell the roses or look at the ants, and the seed just sits there until the birds come and take it away. Sure, we can recognize that in our own lives. Some of the seed falls on rocky soil. It's inhospitable. Some of the seed falls among thorns in the busyness of our lives. Sure, we're distracted. Sure, we've got priorities that don't make this the main thing for us, and we don't pick it up, we don't nurture it, we don't give it the time and attention and the air and the water that requires to really grow and take our lives over. But some of it doesn't give a percentage. He just says it's one of the 4 options, but some of the seed falls on good, soft, fertile soil, ready to nurture, ready to be watered, ready and open for sun, plenty of air, plenty of space. Some seed falls on that soil. Another beautiful parable about, on the one hand, how it is that each of us has potential, but that each of us also has these 3/4 of the options that they're just not going to take. And so while it may be that at our worst selves, when we're really functioning out of the lizard brain, and we hear this story as a story of judgment, right? That there are some who get it, some few who get it, right? Those who happen to be all total, perfect, fertile soil. And then there's the rest of everybody else, right? The 3/4 who don't, because they're either pathway or rocky soil or thorns and bristles, right? So there's the winners and there's the losers. You're in or you're out. And this story, and we know that this is true for us because it's Jesus who comes out of the same tradition of Esau and Jacob, who knows that tension is baked into this, who knows there's no perfect and imperfect, who calls the 12 apostles together, one of whom leads the whole thing and gets the keys to the kingdom, Peter, who's a complete buffoon, right? Our story is full of folks who are mixed realities, folks who get it on the one hand and the very next moment lose it completely. That's the story of us. It's the story of us. And so we can hear this story, not as a story of judgment, that some get it, some are good, some don't get it, and they're bad, but to hear this as a story about the truth of the inner landscape of each and every one of us. Not just the landscapes of our communities, but the landscapes of our own hearts. That there are parts of each and every one of us that are ready to receive the kingdom, ready to live into the fulfillment of the promise of that peaceable kingdom, ready to do the hard justice work that says we've got to do this and this and this before this, or as the basis of this. But we also know within each one of us, deep in the depths of our hearts and our souls, that there is a whole bunch of inhospitable soil. There's a whole bunch of reasons that we don't all get this stuff. There's a whole bunch of reasons why we resist what God is up to in the world. And so we're a community that has promised perfection, that is always bending towards perfection, that a community also, though, that is constituted of people who are mixed realities in and of themselves, that we're imperfect. It's baked into us. Now, the goal of knowing all this about ourselves isn't to get us off the hook, but it is to say, here's another tool we're going to give you, another resource to keep you in the arena doing the hard work. Rather than writing anybody off and writing them out of God's hope for the world, everybody is in, and everybody is a mixed reality of perfection and imperfection, right? Of hope and despair, of hard work, of possibilities. And if we can just see that about one another, if we can recognize, even at a very basic metaphorical level, even at the level of mythology, this great meta-narrative about what God has done in the world around us, even if we only know that one little bit, even if we only have that one inkling that slows us down, if all we know is that we're kin, from the same source, bearers of the same promise, imperfect each one of us on this road between the now and the not yet, the goal is that it keeps us in it. Rather than turning completely away, it keeps us in it, bending even the most slight way toward one another. That is the goal of narrative like this. That's why we have these great meta-narrative stories about the nature of the world, the nature of God, and the nature of us in that relationship with God and world. Again, the lizard brain may at this moment, when things are getting hard, when we're getting tired of one another, when our patience is growing thin, it may well be that many among us are thinking, this may be a situation where annihilation is the best way to go. You can hear it out there, it's in the discourse. But the good news of the gospel and the challenge to us, because it's comprehensive, because it includes each and every person as bearers of the hope, as participants in the kingdom of God potentially, what we're asked for is not mutual annihilation. Our solution as people of faith is mutual affection, even at the deepest level, to remember that we are part of the same family tree, bearers of the same promise, practitioners of the same hope, bearers of the same imperfection in a world that is just longing for us to get it right. In the meantime, this side, east of Eden, That is our good news, and that may just well be enough. That may well just be enough to ensure that there is no mutual destruction. It may assure just enough that we hold out just enough hope and promise for the person down the street who has driven us mad just one time too many, that we lean in just enough to give them the benefit of the doubt, to consider the possibility that God may well be up to something with them, to see if we've got the capacity to sit, to listen, to be curious, to wonder, and if at all possible, to nurture the seeds that have been planted there. And if we're really fortunate, at our worst, we'll have people around us doing the very same thing for us when we find ourselves at our worst. It's pretty good news. Amen.